My team, which sits in 11 offices around the globe, is responsible for maintaining the policies for what people can do on Facebook. Basically, what can you post? What can you advertise? And this community is now more than 2 billion people. We're about 2.3 billion people using Facebook every month. And the vast majority, about 87%, are outside the United States and Canada. So if you think about what it takes to write rules to keep a community like that safe, but also create room for expression, that's what my team is trying to do every day.
Okay, so mission accomplished. Yes. All right, so you recently came back from a few weeks in Sydney, Sri Lanka, and Singapore. While you were out, nothing happened at Facebook. Everything's cool.
It's always quiet.
But tell us a bit about what you were doing out there.
One of the things that we try to do is talk a lot to people on the ground. If we want to know what it takes to keep hate speech off the site, we need to understand what hate speech looks like in Kenya, in India. And that means we have to interact with communities. Sometimes that's civil society organizations, sometimes it is leaders in communities, and sometimes it's actually just people on the ground. So in Singapore, I was meeting with members of the public, also some groups, some safety groups, some expression groups, and hearing, they were actually coming from all over Southeast Asia, and hearing from them what they think about our community standards. Back in April, we released, as you know, we released all the details of how we actually implement our rules on things like hate speech and bullying and keeping terror propaganda off the site. So I was getting their feedback. I went to Sri Lanka and met with people from women's organizations, child safety organizations, all different types of groups who wanted to share with us what they're seeing in terms of safety risks, both offline and online. And then in Australia, I met with some female journalists and heard concerns unique to them, as well as some other community groups. I should say, by the way, this is, I mean, I love doing this part of the job. It's really interesting for me to get that perspective, but most of that work is actually done by my team. And they're based around the world because of that. And they also have unique backgrounds so that they have these ties in the community. So it's the people who work on my team are not engineers from California sitting in the office right near Stanford. These are people who have backgrounds in safety. I'm a former federal criminal prosecutor. I worked on child safety cases and other violent crimes. Other people on my team, I have a woman who did her PhD in radicalization of far-right extremist groups and went undercover with a group in Hungary. I have another woman who was a rape crisis counselor. I have a European human rights lawyer. So all of these sorts of people bring their expertise and then leverage that to talk to groups out in the community every day.
Okay, and you mentioned the community standards, and I actually printed out a copy. It's 27 pages. It's incredibly complicated. It's like the worst bedtime reading you could ever imagine, because no offense,
don't do
no
that.
offense. There's horrible stuff in here, which I'm sure you came across in real life. But the level of complexity and nuance involved with setting up policy for billions of users across the globe is insane. And you know, I don't know if I should read it, but you guys should read it on your own. But I want to ask you, you know, when you started, I mean, you knew what people were like in the real life and the crimes that people commit and sort of the ugly side of human nature. Did you know that this would be such an undertaking at Facebook when you started out?
It's every day it is a new challenge. And you're right. This is, if you read this, it's worth. I mean, of course, I'm biased, but I think
there's like
worth
dismemberment
looking at this.
and cannibalism and
exactly.
You know, like
so
it's lovely.
If you're going to write rules to try to maintain a safe space, you have to think about exactly how to implement those at the scale of more than 1 million reports a day. So we're getting these, we have billions of posts, we're getting these reports from people using Facebook, and we also have technical tools now that find a lot of this content even before people report it to us. Like for instance, with terror propaganda, more than 99% of what we remove from the site for being terror propaganda, we find ourselves before anybody flags it. So if you're gonna have that volume of content and you need to be reviewing it, the rules have to be really granular, because even in this room, I'm sure we have a lot of shared experiences, but we would all have different ideas about exactly where to draw the line on, say, bullying or hate speech or nudity. And so the rules have to be super granular. And back in April, what we decided was, let's just let people know exactly how we are defining these things. It's not gonna please everybody. but at least we'll tell you where it is, and we'll also give you the right to appeal. That's something that we rolled out in early May, and it's not completely rolled out. But basically what that means is if we remove your post or your photo for violating our community standards, now you can ask us to take a second look. And starting next year, we will also, if you report something to us and we say, thanks for reporting this, but it doesn't violate our standards, you can also ask us to take a second look so that we can make sure we're getting it right. So we're trying to give you, here's the details, and then you can ask us to take a look if we get it wrong.
And it's not just the complexity of deciding what can and can't be on the site, but it's also figuring out what are the problems, and as you said, different things mean different things to different people, right? And in order to first realize what the possible problems are, you need to have people who know it and who are living that experience. And so, Myanmar has come up repeatedly as really an example of where this is a life and death situation. Facebook was used to spread disinformation and incite hate and violence. And at the time, you didn't have Burmese-speaking content moderators. So
we did.
You did.
Not enough.
How many did you have?
Not enough. And so now, I think, look, there are a couple complexities to the situation in Myanmar. And misinformation, that's tricky territory, because trying to ask a private company to make a determination in real time about what's true or false in an area where it's sometimes hard to tell, that's difficult. But one clear problem that we had there was not enough language support. So when all this content gets reported, it's coming into real people who are reviewing it and applying these policies. And we have native speakers of more than 50 languages. But at the time that we saw violence in Myanmar, back in the early spring, we had too few. The way that we determined, it's kind of a good example of when you think about some of the challenges unique in social media and having communities this large. We've traditionally thought about hiring language reviewers by saying, okay, well, how many reports do we get in that language? And how many people do we need to review the reports within 24 hours and to make sure we're doing it, meeting our accuracy requirements? But what we saw in Myanmar was if there's violence on the ground, you're going to see a spike in social media use. You're going to see a spike in content that's close to the line or violating the line, a spike in reports, and you can't just hire a bunch of Burmese speakers when that happens in Dublin and in the United States or Germany. And so what we had to do was ramp up our teams. We now, last I checked, we were at 99 Burmese-speaking content reviewers. We should.
You need to hire one more, because you said
exactly.
You have 100.
We're going to have 100 by the end of the year. We may actually already have that 100th. But do we need 100 Burmese content reviewers on a daily basis? No. But if there is a spike, we need to be ready for it. And so that's what we're trying to do now.
But how do you get ahead? I mean, you raised the point of it after the fact. Of course, it's helpful, but you didn't have them. You didn't have enough of them before this spread. How do you make sure that your content moderators are diverse enough and that you're picking up on things before they become problematic and spread like crazy? And also that your algorithms are not biased, because you're using technology to an AI to do some of the content moderation on the site right now.
The biggest way that we get ahead of problems is not from our content reviewers, but actually engaging with these groups. So like what I was doing in Sri Lanka, that's something that we have a specific team that goes out and talks to people on the ground and says, what are you seeing in this region? We just commissioned a human rights impact assessment in Myanmar to understand what should we be doing to make sure that we are keeping the community, doing our part to keep the community safe there. Those lessons we're applying in other countries. We're doing one in Sri Lanka right now. We're also talking to people on the ground in regions where there has been violence, or we know because of political tensions there may be violence, so that we can hire those content reviewers and get ahead of it.
Okay. I'll turn to you guys for a quick question or two in just a second, but and can we get a microphone going over here so we're ready? Real quick, okay, November 15th, your CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, published something he called a Blueprint for Content Governance and Enforcement. And I'm just going to read a very quick quote from it. He said, "The past 2 years have shown that without sufficient safeguards, people will misuse these tools to interfere in elections, spread misinformation, and incite violence. One of the most painful lessons I've learned is that when you connect 2 billion people, you will see all the beauty and ugliness of humanity." So my question to you is, as someone who has worked as a prosecutor, worked abroad, worked on human trafficking cases, do you think that if Zuckerberg had had an experience and was older maybe than when he started the company, would he have assumed that that ugliness would pop up on the site and that this wouldn't just be a safe platform naturally that could self-regulate? Do you think that having that life experience would have made it not so surprising of a reality today?
Obviously, I can't speak for Mark, but I can tell you that even when I joined the company 7 years ago, when we were at about 2,000 employees, we were pretty small, even then we had teams that were focused on exactly these things. So it's not that we didn't recognize that in a very large community of really well-intentioned people, you're going to have a very small sliver that are engaged in abusive behaviors. We knew that, but it is quite a different thing to understand how to identify that content and deal with it in this online space. It hasn't really been done. If you think about like what this looked like 10 years ago, the landscape was totally different. Now we're working with smaller companies, startups, for instance, with counterterrorism, we're working with hundreds of different companies and showing them what we've learned about how to find terror propaganda, how to write policies. We're sharing technology with smaller companies, whether it's child safety or whether it's terror propaganda, and we're trying to make sure that newer companies that don't have the resources can actually tackle these challenges and beat the curve a little faster than we did.
Quick question over here.
Hi, I'm Priya Mukherjee, VP Consumer Products at Viacom. First of all, such a cool job, but what a challenging job. So hats off to you and your team for doing something like this. The question I had was, this job can be challenging in terms of, as you said, the ugliness. You get to see the ugly side of humans, and there are people trying to put down things or get rid of unwanted sort of sites and articles. What do you do to keep the people doing that sane and depression-free? Because I can imagine they're probably, I don't know, suicidal. It's the fact that we have the Woolsey fires and firefighters. There's so many sort of suicide rates. That's what made me think about this.
Do they get some kind of
Absolutely.
therapy or?
So this is a challenging job. That said, the content reviewers are really well supported. We make sure that at all of our, if you walk through Facebook offices, it doesn't look like what it looked like when I worked in a government office. I'll tell you that. It's like these are offices where people are sitting together in pods and working together. We try to co-locate employees so that they have support resources that they can all share together. So all of our outsourcing centers, contract centers, employee centers have counseling services. We have around-the-clock counseling. We have on-site counselors. And we also have, I think this is like maybe the most important part of it, a training program that sets expectations early on. If you are hired to be a content reviewer at Facebook, you are told, here's how it works. This may not be the job for you. If you think it is the job for you and you go into it and you're working on, say, graphic content and it's uncomfortable, then you can request reassignment and you are reassigned to a different topic. So we definitely want to make sure that the people who are working on this content, that they're safe. As to the broader sort of, what does it mean to look at content like this on the internet, the wonderful thing about social media is that, yes, you have these abusive actors, but we get so much good from this product. And it's true for women. I mean, if we look at Me Too and the Women's March and International Women's Day being the biggest moment on Facebook in 2017, like those are things that social media gives us. And that's true for our content reviewers, for everybody working at Facebook. We have that realization that, yes, they're gonna be bad actors, but overall, this is something that is giving us a lot of good.
We do need to wrap up, but I'm curious, just quick show of hands, how many of you think that social media has done more good than harm? More harm than good? Okay, that's just an interesting little survey point for you there.
I'll end this by saying, like, sometimes it's big, like when it's, Me Too. In the first 24 hours after the Me Too hashtag hit, we had, I think, more than 12 million people sharing posts or comments or engaging on Facebook. That's amazing. Sometimes it's personal. Like, I think about when my husband had cancer, the biggest thing that helped us when we had to go through long visits at the hospital was having a private Facebook group of all of our friends and family, and we'd be sitting there and I would say, please share your funny stories, we're having a really tense moment. And people would share things and they would play off each other. I was never really a social media user before that. And after that, I was like, okay, I get it now. So that's what we're hoping to provide.
Monica, thank you.
Thanks.
I'll see you out there.